Hello to everyone and welcome to our session on adapting and implementing active learning strategies in your remote classroom. For today, I'm your presenter along with Keith Power. My name is Denise Carew. I'm an instructional designer with CITL or the CITL. And I will be presenting with you. We have Keith Power in here with us today, and Keith will be co-facilitating and presenting with me. So Keith, do you want to go ahead and say hello?
Hello, everyone, and good morning. As Denise mentioned, my name is Keith Power, and I'm an educational developer with CITL. Just to give you just a little bit of my background, I have taught at post-secondary institutions for, full-time for about 7 years, and then I've also taught as a sessional instructor at Memorial and at some colleges up in Ontario. So a lot of the activities that I would include into my teaching, I would consider them to be active based. So if anybody has any questions along the way, just please ask me.
And Justina, I'd like for you to introduce yourself as well, if you want to go ahead.
Sure. Hi, everyone. My name is Justina Carr, and I'm very new to CITL, but I've been teaching at Memorial for the last 15 years. I've been affiliated with the institution for 18, and most of my teaching was done in the area of English as a second language. For the last 10 years or so, it was academic writing, and yes, now I'm here to help other faculty, embrace technology and help them feel comfortable with it, and really enjoying my new role.
That's great. Thank you so much, Justina and Keith. Okay, so just a really quick, brief outline, look at the outline here. It's a fairly full session, so we're going to move along very quickly. But we do have quite a number. We have 4 or 5 active learning pieces in here, and we encourage you to participate as an active learner in this course, and we've created some opportunities to do that. So your participation in these activities will help you with the basic understanding of the concepts, but will also give you a better overall experience and hopefully shed some light on how you can do some active learning in your own remote class. So we're going to start out with an introduction to the topic of active learning. I know that a lot of you know a lot about active learning, so we won't dwell on it too much, but we'll talk about a definition of it, talk about the difference between passive and active, and so on, and we'll talk about some examples. Then we'll move on to the different strategies that we have and trying to determine which strategy is best for your learning need. We'll get into a little bit about planning. We'll talk about Fink's model of planning and what you need to plan in order to make your activities effective and successful in your course. And then Keith is going to go through a fairly more elaborate active learning activity. Some of the ones we have interspersed throughout the hour are brief. Keith's will be a little bit, required quite a bit more planning, I would say. And so we'll give you an example of how you could use a more robust active learning in your class. And we'll finish up then with a question period. Now, the question period doesn't have to always be at the end. You can certainly ask questions in the chat. You can turn on your mic and ask a question if you'd like to do that. Any way that you want to interact in session is more than fine with us. We certainly appreciate any kind of interaction. So we're going to get you started with an active learning piece here. So one of the things that is often very important in teaching and in your classes is to ask your students to think about what they already know about something. And it's a little bit of a warm-up. It can also be a little bit of a warm-up to gain attention and get them thinking about what they already know about something. So as I mentioned in the introduction, I know a lot of you already know a lot about active learning, so I'd like to get you to think about that. And so we've put 3 questions here. How do you define active learning, how you'd describe your experience in active learning, and your interest in active learning. So I'm going to give you 1 minute. I actually have a timer here, so I'm going to time you for a minute. And I'd like for you to write down something about one or more of these questions that we have here. And then I'll ask for volunteers. We'll take another minute or two to discuss as a team. Okay, so if you want to take a minute, grab a pen, and I'll give you a minute to write out something on one of these questions. Okay, so we'll get started now. Okay, just about to finish up there. Okay, that's our minute. So before I actually get into the definitions and descriptions of active learning, would anyone like to turn on their mic and either read out what you wrote in your 1 minute or give us a quick synopsis of it?
This is Linda Cohen. I was thinking it was working through some sort of a problem, either a problem of understanding material or a problem in real time or real life, something like that.
Okay, so working through a problem. That's good. Anyone else want to share?
In the chat, we have a few comments.
Okay, go ahead, Keith, if you'd like to.
Yeah, I think active learning is the same as experiential learning or participatory learning. I think students like it way better than traditional lecture. Yes, better student evaluations and good for teaching philosophy. So those are all very good points. Yeah, and going back to the other one about solving problems, that's one type of active learning. It's one strategy. So one of the things that we hope to do today is actually introduce you to multiple strategies. It doesn't always have to be solving a problem, but that is definitely in the list that we're going to share. So that's great. And experiential learning and participatory learning, again, those are also different strategies that would fall under the active learning umbrella. So thank you for sharing. Back to you.
Yeah, thanks. And also gives the learner responsibility and accountability. Absolutely. We'll talk about that a lot as well. The responsibility and accountability piece is very important. So it doesn't all go onto the instructor's shoulders. So here's a couple of definitions that I particularly like about active learning. And the first one, it involves students in doing things and thinking about what they're doing. And of course, the things that they are doing are specific to what they're learning in this case. So if you have your learning outcomes for a particular module or topic or concept, then getting students to do something with that and apply what they learned rather than just listening or reading or watching something. So problem solving would go in there. They would, take something that they've learned and then apply it to a problem. So that is one way of thinking about it. The other definition talks about the intentional inclusion of some sort of strategy. It can be in the classroom setting. It can also be in a homework setting as well. But I like the inclusion of this definition because I really like engagement. So getting students engaged in the learning process. So a very simple activity like the one that we just did got you engaged immediately in your learning, got you thinking and activated. And so thinking about active learning from the engagement perspective and also the application perspective and applying what students have learned is, I think, are two key things that I personally like about active learning. So these are two definitions that we like. Somebody did ask about the PowerPoint slides, and we will be providing those after the session. So there are some references and so on in the PowerPoint slides that you can avail of as well. So just to sort of tag along with our definition of active learning, you often think of active learning being the opposite of passive learning. So I kind of like thinking of it like that as well. So when you think of passive learning, you think of students sort of just listening to something, maybe listening to a lecture or watching, following along as somebody demonstrates something. They're basically just receiving information. Even sometimes reading a book or watching a video can be very passive. And then we can do some of those things, a lecture, reading a book, or reading a passage, or watching a video with more intention. And that's where the active learning comes in. So active learning, we're often seeing students doing something with the content rather than just receiving it. We're asking students to purposefully observe and see what's happening while they're observing. And then reflecting, hopefully with others, but sometimes even with themselves, to make meaning of what they've read or listened to or observed. So that is, for me, kind of important to think about that passivity versus being active. And then changing from active to passive immediately helps with engagement. So those are some other ways of kind of looking at the definition of active learning as well. So if you know what it is, then why would you do active learning in your classroom? And so here's some sources, some research that has been done on active learning. Beyond the engagement part, and the engagement I think is critical, but it's for deeper learning as well. We talked about earlier, so one of you mentioned about problem solving and be able to apply what students have learned, helping them to apply what they've learned, not just have that bit of nugget of knowledge, but actually take that nugget of knowledge and apply it to a problem. I think that is very important. But the enthusiasm, once you're involved in something, you have more enthusiasm about it for sure. Active learning does help with those graduate capabilities as well, communicating, collaborating, critical thinking and problem solving. All those sorts of things are they're easier to kind of gain those skills with active learning than it is with passive learning for sure. And then I think somebody also mentioned the perceptions and attitudes in the class towards, information literacy. That could be a graduate attribute in itself. But there's a lot of gains from active learning and a lot of research done on it. So just wanted to present a few nuggets here for you as well. Okay, so we are going to do another quick activity. So this activity, we're going to brainstorm some of the activities. Before we're going to show you some activities as well, and this is the second active learning activity as an example. But we want you to kind of brainstorm some activities that you would classify as active learning and be able to use for active learning in your classroom. So Keith, I think, is going to put in a link to a Mentimeter. Mentimeter is a polling tool. We've used a polling tool that's outside of WebEx, so we could just show you that there are lots of different tools that you can avail of. But Keith is going to put that in the Keith is going to put that in the chat for you, and we'll ask you to enter some activities. We'll give you a couple of minutes for this one, and we're going to create a word cloud of all the different entries that you put in there and display it on the screen, and we can have a little bit of a chat about that. So, activities that you know of, that you've participated in, or that you've used in your classroom, keep in mind that you can put more than one word in a box, so it doesn't have to be brainstorming. It could be, 3 different words if your entry requires that. So I'm just going to unshare. Sorry, I'm just going to unshare the presentation for a moment and share the Mentimeter with you. Okay, so Keith, can you confirm that you can see that one there now?
Yes, I can.
Okay, and can you add entries? Are you able to add entries there, Keith?
On the link and it did not go. But if you type in mentimeter.com in a web page, it should go. Let me try that.
I'm there, but it's telling me that I have to sign up.
Oh.
And no credit card is needed.
There we go. Yeah, it's just menti.com. We've got some entries coming up on the screen there, as you can see. So we'll just go to www.menti.com, MENTI, and the code is 7212981.
Yeah, you don't have to sign up. You just have to enter the code at the top of the page, and it should take you to the page.
Yes, thank you. Sorry about that.
No worries.
No problem. Keep in mind you can put in more than 3 entries as well. Once you have your 3 entries, you can start over again if you like. And feel free to put in something that maybe somebody else already put in, because as you can see, the words increase in size, showing that a lot of people know of certain things, certain activities. Okay, I think we have a pretty good list there. People can continue to enter if you'd like, but just to sort of discuss a couple of these in particular, and I have a slide of sample activities on the next slide, but I think you've covered them all pretty well here. One of the ones that pops out to me, and is actually in small letters, so on the fly polls. So we often think of active learning as being sort of intentional. You think about a topic and you figure out an active learning activity that students can use to really learn that topic or that concept. But sometimes you realize in class that we have a difficult situation here. Maybe students are not understanding, you're getting a vibe in class that they're not understanding something. So doing an on-the-fly poll to get that engagement back can be really, really helpful. Lab experiments, case studies, things like that, where students can apply what they've learned. Lots of opportunities for communities, debating with each other and discussing things like that. Think, Pair, Share is a really good one, can be done in a remote class and can certainly be done in a face-to-face class as well. Doing role plays and watching role plays are very good ways of applying and practicing skills as well. So these are really good examples. I really like all of them that you have here. I'll put up our slides. Sorry, I can't share two things at once. So I'll reshare our slide because on the slide we have some examples as well. Many of the examples we have here you also talked about. One different one that I have here is gallery walks, and it's just simply using images to talk about a concept. So you may provide 5 or 6 images and you walk through and talk about, there's different ways of doing it, but you can walk through each image and ask students to reflect on the image, think about what it means to them, and so on. Another thing that you can do, and I don't know if it's listed here, I can't see, yeah, tell a friend. We often, when I'm working with content authors about putting activities in their course, one of the things that's very important is making sure students get a good, deep understanding of a concept. And sometimes if they have to explain to somebody who doesn't know anything about it, explain or discuss something, they realize maybe I don't understand this concept quite as good as I did before. So that getting activities in there where they maybe turn to a student next to them, or they have to discuss it with somebody outside of their classroom. It also gives them a certain amount of feedback. As I mentioned, they may realize maybe I didn't know this concept quite as well as I thought. So things like that where students can do something and get immediate feedback through that activity is also very, very useful.
Denise, we have 2 questions in the chat.
Sure.
So the first one, did Mentimeter create the word cloud for you? So I'll let you answer.
Yeah, yes, that's right. So Mentimeter, you can do like 2 free Mentimeters. So once you're finished with it, you just destroy it and you can create another couple for your class, or I have a free account. So that's all I can create. But yes, you can choose different types of activities, and so you can have students, type in a text box, and all the text boxes show up on the screen. And you can do the word cloud, which we've seen, and yeah, I didn't do anything. I just let Mentimeter. I think you can change the colors and things like that, but Mentimeter does the work for you for sure. Yep. And that's why I wanted to do that one versus the polling tool that's inside WebEx, because I did want to show you that it creates a word cloud, and it's kind of fun and engaging in itself. And the other question, Keith?
Can I ask sorry.
Yes, go ahead.
Okay, I was going to ask if this is doable inside of Brightspace, because I don't use WebEx, but I use Brightspace all the time.
Yes, so Brightspace, the Bongo tool, is very similar to WebEx. So you could definitely do it just like we did, set it up, and then share your screen, your Mentimeter screen. Provide students.
Oh, that's what you're doing, sharing your screen.
Yes,
on the computer.
yes.
Okay,
that's
yeah,
right.
I see it.
Yeah,
okay.
I shared my screen. Yeah.
Yeah, thanks. Sorry.
Oh, no worries. Yeah, go ahead, Keith.
The other question is, what is a Think, Pair, Share? So I'll go ahead and answer that if you don't mind.
Sure.
So Think, Pair, Share is just, let's go back to the example where you have a problem and you want to solve that problem. What you might want to get your students to do is to actually think about that problem as an individual first. And then what you would do is then get them to come up with their own solutions to that problem. Then pair them with somebody else or a small group. And when they're in that group, then they could actually share the solutions that they came up with individually. And then as a group, then they come up with a final solution. Excuse me. So they're basically, it's an opportunity for them to, you know, see how other people solve the problem, to learn from other people's solutions and strategies, but then also to collaborate and coming up with a final solution. So really, it's just working by yourself for a little bit, then pairing them up with somebody else and having them share, and then working together as a team.
Thank you, Keith. And just to give you a very quick example, I worked with an instructor who taught in psychology, and she had a very large class, and she would do something like this, but just basically, you know, having one student turn to their student on their right or their left. As an example, she would give them something maybe like scientific theory in psychology, and she would explain, you know, she'd do a lecture on the theory, or on, you know, maybe it was research or something along those lines. And then she would ask the student to think about things in their own life that they've experienced that would fall under that scientific theory, and they would turn and talk to each other. And so that was a bit more difficult to do in remote. So she just made it a little bit more elaborate. So she did, instead of just doing them one at a time, she maybe put 4 or 5 in a PowerPoint presentation. And then the students would meet online in this type of environment, in Bongo, or they could choose other ways, but we set it up with her for Bongo. And they discussed the research or the theory or whatever it was. She had 4 or 5 examples in a PowerPoint, and they discussed it and applied the theory to their regular life. So that is another way that you could take something that maybe is quite easy, and somebody said, like, on the fly, you could probably do that on the fly in your class, but you might be able to establish it as an activity, sort of that intentional kind of activity that we talked about. So I'm going to hand it over now to Keith. And so we're going to talk about, how do you decide which activity is best? So I'll leave it to Keith to get you started on that topic.
Sure. So we've looked at a lot of different activities and strategies that can be used in the class, and there's a few things that you should think about before you decide which one is going to be best for your students. So one of the things that you would think about is, what are you trying to achieve? What is the learning outcome that you want your students to walk away with? So when you consider that question, you might pick one activity over another. So for example, if you're just looking for something to keep them engaged, the Mentimeter might be just a quick way to get them, you know, their attention back. But if you want them to get involved in really deep critical thinking, you might want to work with the, you know, the think, pair, share. So different activities have different, you know, rationales for being used. And then you might also want to consider, what concepts do the students have difficulty with? So if you identify a concept, you know, let's say in biology, they're having a very difficult time making connections, you know, with different cell functions. What you might want to do then is get students involved in creating a concept map. And that way they can actually start making linkages by creating that map. And then you also have to think about, at what point do students disengage? And again, I go back to the Mentimeter example there. You know, usually students can pay attention to a lecture for about 10 to 15 minutes, and then they're going to start to wane. So it's good to probably introduce active learning regularly into your classroom. So you don't want to be up in front of your class for 30 minutes just talking to them. They're going to tune out, and they're not going to actually be paying attention to what you're saying. So that was what we would consider passive learning. So in a 1 hour lecture, you'd probably want to throw in 3 or 4 little activities, or you'd probably want to break it up so that you have a bit of a lecture at the beginning and then a larger activity in the middle, and then at the end, then you can come back and clue up what, you know, look at that activity and talk about it as a group. So again, the next question is, what are you trying to achieve? And again, you have to look at all these different factors and then decide which activity is going to be best for you. Can you go to the next slide, please, Denise? So I put a couple of examples up here. So a teaching strategy, we talked a lot about problem-based learning already. There's project-based learning. But I also put in here the think, pair, share. So if you're involved in problem-based learning, you might want to use that strategy, you know, along with the problem-based learning. If you're in a project-based learning environment, you may get people together and then do a brainstorming activity. And I'll be going through a little bit of a brainstorming activity later to show you the Bono 6 hats. So if you are using flipped classroom, something that you might want to use there is concept mapping. So to give you an example, with a flipped classroom, you basically provide the materials to the students before they actually come to class, so that they review what's going to be done in that class. But one thing you could ask them to do is create a concept map based on that material. They bring that to class and then they can share it with the other students, and they're sharing how they see the material making linkages. And again, we have, you know, peer teaching. You could use group discussions after that. If you're involved in a lecture and you need to talk about information and you need to present that, again, you could break it up with just a little 1-minute paper. So after 15 minutes, you could ask, you know, your students to create a small summary of what you covered thus far. So again, you're breaking it up and giving them a moment to actually engage and reflect and think. If you have guest speakers coming in your class, you could assign students into groups where they do collaborative note-taking. So once again, in a remote environment, it's easy to just get them to go into Google Forms or a Google Doc, and they can start taking notes as a group, and then the students can learn from what notes the other students are taking. And they can see, you know, this person thought this was really important. I didn't get that, or I missed that piece. So, and then afterwards, you can get them to come together as a group and discuss those group notes and learn from each other about what they thought was important from that, you know, guest speaker. And again, you know, for experiential learning, you may want to get your students involved in some role playing. So these are just some simple examples that you could apply in your class. If you'd like to learn more about these, like we don't have enough time to really go into depth. I'm just trying to introduce these. You're more than welcome to connect with myself or Denise, and we'd be happy to go through these strategies with you, you know, in a more detailed setting, so we can give it, you know, give you more information about how this would actually apply. The last thing that you have to consider is the time available. How much time do you have in that class to get people involved in an activity, and how much time do students need? You know, looking at technology, some people are very comfortable with technology, some people are not. So you have to think about, you know, what's right for you. So maybe checking out Mentimeter and learning a little bit about it, and as you become comfortable with it, then you incorporate it into your class. So that would be your comfort level. The last thing we would mention is too many activities can become overwhelming. So again, you want to balance that. How much time do you want students involved in, you know, in these different activities? Or would you rather have, you know, one big activity that they work on for an extended period of time? So just considering what students would like. One of the things that you could ask them is actually poll them and see how, if they like the activities you're doing and what they think of them. Get some feedback from them, and then use that as you move forward, you know, in your classes the following semester, or, you know, the next lecture. All right, so the last thing what we're going to do here is we're going to do another little learning activity. So this is your 2-minute paper. So in the side chat, I would like you to list one of the active learning strategies that you learned about today, or from slide 10. We'll go back to slide 10 in a minute so you can actually see those, that you would like to learn more about and possibly use in one of your classes. Please also provide a brief reason why you picked that activity. What is it about that activity that interests you? So I'll let you, you know, we're going to pause for about 2 minutes, and then we'll hopefully see some answers coming up in the chat, and then we can talk just a little bit about those, and if anybody has any questions, we can answer any questions. So we'll start now. Can you go back to slide 10 there, Denise, please?
That's the 2 minutes there, Keith.
Perfect. We have a few answers coming in here. So concept mapping is a great idea. Yeah, I actually love concept mapping, and I, for me personally, I was taught how to do it in grade 7, and it was one of the best things that I had actually ever learned in my life. My science teacher, grade 7, taught us how to create concept maps as a way of studying for exams, and it was a way for us to actually just engage with the material. And then basically you didn't have to study because you're really just putting it together and understanding it. So it's a great tool. Um, Let me see. Tell a friend. I really like that idea. Yeah. Especially. Yeah, I think telling a friend is a really good idea. And another really creative assignment that I saw before was that students had to actually look at science concepts, and they had to then create some kind of a video, or they could do a song, or they had to be able to explain it to a group of elementary students. So that was the assignment. And then they had to go to the elementary students and they had to share it with them. And so they were not just telling a friend, but they were explaining these concepts in a way that a 10-year-old could understand them. So that's another great way to get students to engage with material. But thank you for sharing. Denise, we can move on from there.
Okay, thank you, Keith. And we would ideally like a little bit more time to discuss that, but we do want to get to the Bono's activity at the end. So I'm just going to move ahead fairly quickly here. I just wanted to talk a little bit about planning, planning your activity, and thinking about, first of all, some key characteristics of active learning. And right at the end of this slide, you'll see the interactions that are kind of important. We're talking about community of inquiry here, and that social and cognitive presence that is important for learning. And so one of the things that you can think of when you're designing your activity is to determine what kind of interaction do you want? Is that student-to-student interaction really important? We just heard a mention of telling a friend, and sometimes, having that social collaboration is critically important to the learning. So the thing that we want to make sure that you're thinking about is, how do you choose your activity? And so thinking about that part of it is important, but also thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve. And Keith mentioned that before, but lining it up with your learning outcomes. So if you want somebody to be able to solve a problem, you have to give them opportunities to actually do that. So an active learning that gives them hands-on experience where they're applying a concept would be appropriate. Getting them to discuss how they would do it may not be as appropriate. It can be, though, it can be, you know, part of the planning to kind of articulate how they might approach a problem. That might be important, but actually having an activity where they do apply and solve that problem would be critical. Just quickly with the Fink's model of active learning, and I'll give you, you know, I would suggest that you come back to this on your own time and dig into it a little bit more. I particularly like Fink's models of active learning because you'll notice here in this diagram there are no arrows. So you could actually, you don't always have to start with information. You don't always have to start a lecture by providing students information. You could get them to reflect on something first. You could get them to do something, you know, just to get them started. It doesn't always have to start with information. But having these three things together, so students have information that they may apply through a doing or an observing situation, and then they may reflect on what they did, they may get feedback from what they did and reflect on that feedback. So the combination of these three kinds of things together really does make for a really good, solid active learning activity. And finally, I wanted to, in terms of your planning, think about the key components. Now, we actually, we bypassed some of these for this session. And the reason was because we only have 1 hour. If you are doing, teaching a course and you have a couple of classes per week for, you know, 6 or 12 weeks, then we highly recommend, you know, setting up your environment, you know, setting that expectation with the students very clearly, giving them options. So we ask you to write in the chat. You may have that as one option. Students could reply in a private chat. Students who didn't want to write could respond via audio, different things along those lines. So we often hear from instructors that it's very difficult to get students engaged, to get them talking, and even more so now in remote. So thinking about that and coming up with, you know, asking students to participate, giving them the safe environment in which to do so, and having that planned well ahead of time will go a long way. Pardon me, excuse me. And at the end here, I know I haven't gone through all these key points, but at the end here, you know, sometimes it's just important just to, you know, we know you've planned it intentionally, so you have that activity, but sometimes just go for it, you know, just try something. It might not be perfect. The things we did here today weren't perfect, although they were planned, but it's not always perfect, but students are usually very forgiving about different things, and they appreciate that you've tried to make it engaging. So go ahead and plan as best you can. Be prepared, perhaps, and maybe get some help for certain things. But, you know, feel comfortable and set that expectation with students as well, that sometimes this might be a little bit of a rocky road, but it's important to have that active learning in your course. Okay, so this is the funnest part of the activity for me, where I hand it over to Keith, and Keith is going to do a fun but effective activity with you. So without further ado, Keith, here you go.
Well, I'm glad you have fun, Denise. All right. So yeah, I would like to introduce Edward de Bono's 6 thinking hats. And this is just a simple activity that I've used in my classes. I found it very effective for getting students to actually start to think about things in a critical way. And it can be used in many different ways. So for project brainstorming, to group discussions, you know, problem solving, critical thinking, developing these skills, and you know, it can be used in a range of environments that I'll give you a couple of examples later. But I want to move into the activity because we are getting slow on time. But de Bono's 6 hats looks at any ideas, or it tries to approach things from 6 different perspectives. So for example, you have your green hat where you're expected to think creativity. So you want the students to actually think about something in a creative way. If you're talking about something and, people sometimes are very negative, and that's important. It is really important to actually identify problems within something, a concept or an idea. The way that we actually solve problems and react is heavily influenced by our emotions. So we have to acknowledge those emotions, as we move through life. It's also very important to be positive and to look at the positive things that are happening or that are involved in some kind of a situation. The white hat is more involved with just strictly facts. This is the information. You're trying to eliminate those emotions. You're not trying to be positive. You're not trying to be negative or creative. You really just want to look at facts. And the blue hat is a process. So when you put on the blue hat, you're actually just trying to think of the process that you want to go around and to solve a problem, for example. So we're going to look at a little situation and a problem, and I'm going to hopefully get you engaged in answering this problem using the Bono 6 hats. So for the upcoming semester, well, this semester or even the next, next semester, you have 100 students in your class. You want to use the Bono 6 hats to facilitate a discussion between your students, and you need to decide whether to do it synchronously or asynchronously. Let's use the Bono 6 hats to help you evaluate the synchronous option. Okay, so what we're going to do is we're going to work through a couple of these hats, and what I would like you to do then is, as we're moving through, can you go to the next slide, Denise, please? So we're going to look at it. I'm going to start off. I actually have my yellow hat here, so I'm going to put on my yellow hat. So you use your yellow hat to consider the benefits and value of implementing the activity synchronously. So what I'd like you to do is share your ideas in the side chat about the benefits and values of doing this in a synchronous environment. So I'll give you all 1 minute to do that, and then we're going to move on through our hats for a little bit. Can't hear you, Denise. I think you're muted.
Yeah, so in that we only have a minute, just encouraging people to use that side chat. You can just put in a couple of words for now. Just trying to get some participation, yep.
Yeah, so we got a couple of comments in there about getting students engaged. I think it does get students engaged. So you would set this up, you would give them a certain amount of time. You might say you have, 5 minutes to think about the positives, and then you're going to switch the hat. So you have a dedicated time, meeting time. So you actually have time where everybody's going to be there. Yep. So we're thinking about some of the positives. All right, perfect. Let's go on to our next hat, Denise, if you don't mind. Our black hat. All right, got my black hat here. So we're going to put it on, and so using our black hats, we're going to look at some of the problems that you foresee implementing this in a synchronous environment. So you got 100 students that you got to coordinate and everything. Can anybody see any problems in running this activity with 100 students? All right, some answers are starting to come in. So technology issues.
And remember, the activity is a discussion, just to remind you. Yep.
Responsive rate. Yeah. So yeah, this is your chance to be very negative. You can be, let the identify those problems. Yeah, it could be something, if I was going to throw in my answer, it would be, it's hard to coordinate with 100 students. But that's something that you'd have to work through. It's definitely going to be a challenge. All right, we'll move on to our next hat there, Denise. So I'm going to take off my black hat and I'm going to turn it inside out.
Fancy hat.
There we go. So using your red hat, you have to consider your emotions. So how would you feel about implementing this activity synchronously? And this is all about what you just really feel. Is it something you would want to do or not want to do? And you know, feel free to express those feelings so that you understand where you feel, you would be. So good, but worried that it might not work. Yeah. Thank you for sharing. Deflated if it's unsuccessful. True. But here's the thing. I think Denise just said this earlier. You got to try. We got to, you just got to put yourself out there. Try it. See if it works. If it doesn't, then you reset. I'm being positive here now, and I'm not supposed to be positive because I got my red hat on. But I'm just, engaging with you at the moment. All right, let's go to our last hat. So I'm going to take off my red hat. And
Oh, we don't have a green hat slide, Keith.
Oh, we don't. I'll just put on my green hat anyway. We're
You
supposed
just
to have
want
a
to
green
do that
hat.
because you have a new hat.
Yeah. So anyway, that's okay. The green hat again, then you would get people to actually start to think about things in a creative way. How can you come up with solutions to maybe your emotions, the problems that you see? What are things that you could do? So I just want to show you, you can adapt this activity in many ways. If you were in an engineering, architectural, or environmental science environment, you might have students examine, wooden-based high-rise construction versus concrete-based. And I came up with this idea visiting UBC where, a lot of the buildings that they're now constructing are wooden-based and thinking about that. So you get students engaged in that discussion. In education, you could get them talking about eliminating standardized testing. This is, it's a big topic in education and something that needs to be addressed. And if you're also looking at, humanities and social sciences, health, social work, we could be looking at, a guaranteed basic income. This is something that's been floated around in the media and through our governments, and we've been talking about this, but this is how you can get your students engaged in these discussions and get them thinking through it using the 6 different hats. You can do it in a synchronous environment with a full class activity. You could do breakouts. You could have, use this as a way to prepare for a debate. And you could do it asynchronously. You can get students to use the 6 hats to engage in a writing assignment. They could do a PowerPoint presentation or a video presentation, or you could have an online discussion based on the 6 hats. So we're getting close to the time, so I'm going to finish up there, and I'll let Denise bring us to the end. And if anybody has any questions, we could stay around for a couple of minutes and answer those questions if you have.
Thank you, Keith. That was great. One of the things I like about this particular activity is that it's so adaptable. You certainly don't need to do all 6 hats, as Keith demonstrated. He used 3 or 4 here. You could use, for example, the white and the black, or the the emotions, the red hat and the white hat, where you're looking at emotions and then creativity perhaps, or emotions and then black and white information only. So there's lots of different ways to adapt this activity and a lot of the others as well. I'll just show the slide with the references. We will send out this entire slide deck with the references at the end of the session, but I'll just leave it open. I know we're at the hour, so if you have to leave, that's fine. But if you have any questions, we'd be happy to stay for a few more minutes and answer any questions that you have. So the question from Linda, wondering if Brightspace is not as good as WebEx. I haven't used the WebEx platform before and stayed with Brightspace because students have access. Well, a couple of things here, Linda, and you can follow up with one of us later if you'd like. WebEx is integrated now into Brightspace. It's not quite as readily integrated. You have to go through a couple of steps to do that. I have used the Bongo tool that's part of Brightspace quite a lot, and I actually like it. I think it works just fine. One of the advantages of WebEx is it does a better job of recording. If you wanted to do some recording, then it definitely does a bit of a better job. But I really like Bongo because it's really easy to use. And it does have a nice, well, a decent whiteboard in there as well. So yeah, I would probably suggest that you test out both of them for your next, maybe for your next semester, and decide on your own. But I'm happy with both. But I would definitely recommend Bongo for most lecture purposes for sure.